Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 6-game Major League Baseball slate today. It's a small slate, so we're gonna have some interesting potential today. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? So let's go and get into our pitchers. We're gonna start with Strider today, with a rather small slate and limited good options at the pitching position. He does feel like a must play, though his price is very annoying because he will limit your bats. But if he has a big game, he may be the only big game pitcher on the slate, as he's got is more upside than just about anybody on this one, especially with the strikeout rate. Then we'll look at Max Scherzer for the Texas Rangers. He's in a tough matchup here against Houston, and some bets on Houston are on fire. It's going to be hard to use him at this price, but he's had only one bad game in his last 6 starts with Texas, and he has scored 35 fantasy points for Houston earlier this year when he was with the Mets. So he's definitely viable today, but he's going to be high risk, high reward. Same goes for Verlander today. Now he's contrarian to the top two, but he's been a little bit more inconsistent than those guys above him. And in the matchup, and the matchup is not ideal by any metric, but he's still in play as he's a good pitcher, so he's definitely a potential guy. Then we'll look at Kyle Gibson for Baltimore. He's capable of a 20 fantasy point game here, and he's had 3 in the past 6. His floor is equally as bad, though, and that's where he's had 2 negative games in 2 of the last 4 games. The matchup does give him some upside, though, and he's definitely a good option on the slate, especially at his price point. Also, Toussaint and Lyles are both Hail Mary plays today at the pitching position. Let's go and get into our catchers here now. So we're going to start with Sean Murphy for Atlanta. Now, he has been pretty good throughout the season, though he's a little bit inconsistent recently, being a little bit slumpy, but he still draws good home run metrics here, and he still manages to score some fantasy points, so he does need a hit home run to pay off here. Then we'll look at Francisco Alvarez for the Mets. He's also been kind of shaky recently, but he is a home run or bust kind of play. He's hit the ball pretty well yesterday with a multi-hit game, and I do think he's viable for another big game today, as he has home run metrics for this game and has a great opportunity. Maybe in first base, we'll start with Matt Olson. Pete Alonso here. Uh, where'd he go? No, sorry. He's a core play for me today. I'm losing my head. He's had 3 home runs over the last 10 games. He's in the ball a little bit better now than he was earlier in the season. He's been a little bit streaky this year, but he's got a lot of home run potential. He's actually had 3 home runs in the last 2 games, and so he does draw good metrics here. His price is a little bit cheaper than it has been throughout the season as well, so that does give him a little bit more upside. Then we'll look at Matt Olson here for Atlanta. Now, he's also been hitting the ball very well. He's up to 45 home runs. He's only had 2 in the last 10 games, but he is capable. In the last couple of games, he's had 2 in a row. So I think he's back to hitting the ball pretty well. He's also not striking out very much, which is nice. And he's got really good home run potential today. Then we'll look at Vogelbach for the Mets. He's also in play today as a kind of a home runner best player. He's had 3 home runs over the last 10 games. He's been hitting pretty well recently, and he does draw some good matchup metrics here. He also doesn't need a home run to pay off, but a lot of times he does need that because he kind of been our best when it comes to home run situations. Moving to second base, we'll start with Ozzy Albies for the Braves. Now, he's hit the ball pretty good recently with a 356 average over the last 10 games, including 3 home runs in that stretch. He's really close to 30 home runs now. I look for him to potentially get it today. He did hit one in his last game against St. Louis as well, and so I think he's a viable option on the slate again. He's hitting the ball pretty well recently with a lot of multi-hit games. Though he does need to have a big hit in order to really pay off at this price point. Jeff McNeil is kind of a contrarian option today for the Mets. Now he can play in the outfield as well. He's hit the ball fairly well recently. He's not a huge home run threat, but he's a good base hitter at times, and he has multi-hit potential. He doesn't need a home run to pay off either, especially at this price point. McKinstry for Detroit is kind of a contrarian play today as well. Now, he has been inconsistent throughout the season, and right now he seems like he's been a little bit of a slump, but he does have multi-hit potential, and he's kind of a contrarian option off of McNeil. Maybe into third base, we'll look at Austin Riley, who I think is a core play today for me. He's hit the ball fairly solid with 4 home runs over the last 10 games. He's been a little bit streaky at times, but he definitely draws good home run metrics today, and he's a core play for me. Then we'll look at Moncada for the White Sox. Now, he's kind of a sneaky play as he's hit the ball very well with a 438 average over the last 10 games, including 2 home runs in that stretch. He does tend to strike out some, but he has good metrics. He's hitting the ball decently well, and he has multi-hit potential. He doesn't need a home run to pay off, but especially at this price point. But he does feel a little bit high risk, high reward situation. Then Brett Baty for the Mets, also in play today. Now, he's been very bad the last few games, but And in fact, he's been inconsistent throughout the season. He's a boomer bust, like Hail Mary play on the slate. He's just dirt cheap and helps you pay up at other positions. And this position is fairly weak if you don't go with Riley or Moncada. So maybe in shortstop, we'll look at Francisco Lindor for the Mets. Now, he hasn't been particularly great recently, but he does draw good home run upside today. He's also getting some stolen bases recently, and he's hit the ball pretty well the last 5 games. He just hasn't had a huge fantasy point perspective before that for a little while. Then we'll look at Bobby Witt Jr. Now, he has cooled off from the big crazy thing that he was doing for a few weeks a couple weeks ago, but he's still managing some big games and he has home run potential. He's hitting the ball very well for the most part, so I think he's a great option on the slate, though he's a little bit riskier now that he's been cooling off a little bit. And then CJ Abrams is in play for Washington. He has a good potential here for stolen bases, which gives him a lot of a boost. However, he hasn't had a stolen base in 5 or 6 games, but he definitely has the capacity to do that. He's not a huge home run threat, but he does occasionally hit them. But if he can get on base, he can get stolen bases, and that will help you pay off at the fantasy perspective. Maybe the outfielders. Outfield is actually somewhat limited today, so we'll start with Acuna for Atlanta. I mean, he's Ronald Acuna. He's running for the MVP. He's hitting home runs, stolen bases, everything else. Hitting the ball like crazy good, so it's hard to ignore him. Aaron Judge also in play. He's the very boomer bust version of Acuna. He's really only hitting home runs, or he's not doing much else. He's striking out a lot. So do keep that in mind. But he is capable of a big game here, and obviously when he has a big game, he tends to be at the top of the list of top players. Brandon Nemo also in play today as he's hitting the ball pretty well recently. He's managed to get a bunch of home runs recently with 4 of the last 10, and he's got 22 on the season. So he's seeing the ball pretty well from that perspective. He's also hit Washington in 12 games for 8.2 fantasy points per game, and he's priced just fairly here, so I think he's a great option on the slate. Kerry Carpenter also in play for Detroit. I think Detroit's a little bit sneaky today, and he's definitely a guy that's hit the ball well recently with the 300 average over the last 10. He's managed to score a good double-digit fantasy points a lot too, even without home runs, so that gives him an advantage. And he does have some home run potential today. Eloy Jimenez for the White Sox also in play today. He's hit 270 over the last 10. He's been a little up and down throughout the season, but he has nice metrics here, and he has a good opportunity to have a big game. And then Jeff McNeil again can play in the outfield and as well as second base. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. This slate is rather small. It's going to be a little bit of a difficult one. Usually the small slates are a little bit better, but it's still a decent one. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And have a nice day, guys.